We've been discussing the amazing career of Eliyahu Hanavi, his biblical character and his post-biblical career, which has never ended. And the theme that we're really exploring now is his transformation, his tikkun, you might say. Some people are hesitant to apply that word to Elijah. He's such a hero of the Jewish people. How could this change come about? How could the biblical zealot turn into a Jewish superhero, you might say, a Jewish bodhisattva, a compassionate fanatic, you might say? He doesn't lose his fervor, but he channels that fervor into compassion. You could say he's always an extremist, right? We saw last week that amazing wording, kano kineti. I have been zealously zealous. That's how Elijah describes himself to God at Mount Horeb, at Mount Sinai. So that biblical zealot turns into a compassionate hero. That process happens already in rabbinic literature, and even more dramatically in Kabbalah and throughout Jewish folklore. I want to focus on a few things today. One is Gilui Eliyahu, a revelation of Elijah, that phrase. And then we'll spend a little time looking at Eliyahu and the seder. And finally, perhaps if we have time, touching on Havdalah, and then concluding with some Hasidic teaching on Elijah, what's called Bechinat Eliyahu, an aspect of Elijah. So the phrase Gilui Eliyahu, a revelation of Elijah, you don't find that phrase in the Talmud, but we find many examples of Elijah revealing himself to one rabbi or another. Some rabbis he actually becomes a study partner with. It's interesting when Elijah will stop appearing. He may appear to an individual, and then he'll stop appearing. Why? Because that individual engaged in some unethical conduct. This is a beautiful connection between ethics and mysticism. In Jewish mysticism, ethics is really, you might say, a prerequisite for spiritual experience. You can't encounter Elijah unless you live a strictly ethical life. In fact, there's a special Mishnah called Mishnat Hasidim, a Mishnah for the Hasidim, for the devout, for those who are in love with God. And that is known to Elijah. Elijah follows a Mishnat Hasidim. We only hear one or two examples of that supposed text, that amazing collection, but that characterizes Eliyahu. He's an extremist. He's an ethical extremist. He never loses that quality. So in the Talmud, he does appear frequently, but it's even more so in the Kabbalah that Eliyahu becomes, you might say, the embodiment of Ruach HaKodesh. You remember the connection between Eliyahu and the Ruach, the spirit, right? Eliyahu is elusive. It's hard to pin him down. You have that beautiful quote from the steward of King Ahab, a servant of King Ahab, who says to Eliyahu wordily, "V'ruach Adonai yisa'acha al asher lo eda." The servant says, if I leave you, Elijah, the Spirit of God will carry you off to I know not where. So already in the Bible, it's very hard to pin down Elijah, even more so in the Talmud and in medieval Jewish folklore and in Kabbalah. What's interesting is that Eliyahu appeared to the early Kabbalists according to Kabbalistic tradition. In other words, according to Kabbalistic tradition, Elijah was the source of the teachings of Kabbalah. This is very interesting. Louis Ginsburg, I quoted last week, actually says, what Moses was to the Torah, Elijah was to the Kabbalah. I think that may be a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's true that Elijah is described as conveying the new mystical teachings to these early Kabbalists. Okay, we're talking now about the beginning of the 13th century in Spain, first in southern France and Provence, and then in Spain. That's where Kabbalah emerges in medieval Europe. And we find that the founders of Kabbalah are credited with having a vision of Elijah. That's how they came up with their new teachings of Kabbalah. Now that's very important because what does that say about Eliyahu? He is the one who authorizes new teaching. He gives the stamp of approval, or you might say he is the stamp of approval for new teachings, which tells you something about Kabbalah. It's radically new, but also in some way plugging into an ancient stream of wisdom. And Eliyahu is the one who conveys that wisdom to spiritual seekers. It's fascinating, there's a parallel to Eliyahu, I think I've mentioned just briefly, in Islam. In Islam, he's known as Al-Khidr, the green one. And you have descriptions of Al-Khidr that match almost exactly descriptions of Elijah. He can appear in different forms. He comes to help people in need. He inspires people. And just as the early Kabbalists are credited with being inspired by Eliyahu, with the Gilui Eliyahu, a revelation of Elijah, you find some of the most famous Sufi mystics. They describe an encounter with Al-Khidr, with the Islamic Elijah. So, for example, Ibn Arabi, probably one of the most famous of all the mystics in Islam, a great philosopher and mystic in the 13th century, he describes receiving the mantle of inspiration from Al-Khidr. He says that happened to him twice. He was initiated by Al-Khidr. This is amazing because this is happening in the 13th century, not far away from, in time or place, not far away from where the Kabbalists are being inspired reportedly by Elijah. So Elijah inspires the Kabbalists, Al-Khidr inspires the Sufis, a beautiful example of the wide influence of this unique figure. I want to look at some descriptions of some teachings about Gilui Eliyahu in the Kabbalah. Let's take a look at this PDF. So this is Elijah in the Kabbalah. What Moses was to the Torah, Elijah was to the Kabbalah. That's the quote from Louis Ginsburg. We looked at this short passage about the Zohar. I want to look at number 2, Gilui Eliyahu. This is the wording. As I said, that phrase does not appear in the Talmud, but it appears frequently, not frequently, it appears in medieval literature. And this is a Kabbalist here who's describing an earlier account. He's describing the general phenomenon of Gilui Eliyahu. This number 14 is from Moses Cordovero, great Kabbalist. Sometimes Elijah clothes himself in a person's mind, revealing to him hidden matters. To the person, it seems as if he pondered those things on his own, as if that innovation suddenly entered his mind. This may relate to matters of Torah or to worldly matters. This comes in a concealed manner. It feels as if he said it himself. So what's interesting here, Cordovero is talking about a moment of inspiration, something conveyed by Elijah, but notice it's not clear, is this coming from some outside figure, Elijah the prophet, or is it something that the person is pondering, right, as if that innovation suddenly entered his mind, as if he came up with it. It's not clear whether this is coming from beyond or from deep within. That's just I want to keep open those two possibilities for a moment and look how they reappear here in number 15. This is from a famous figure known as the Maharal of Prague, Judah Lev of Prague, very prolific writer, a Kabbalist, biblical commentator, lived in the 16th century, 16th to 17th centuries. And he's describing here what happens in the Talmud when they talk about Elijah being revealed, for example, to Yehoshua ben Levi. Yehoshua ben Levi is one of the rabbis who's most intimate with Elijah. Elijah comes to visit him frequently. They engage in dialogue. So this is the Maharal of Prague writing in the 16th, 17th century about a Talmudic encounter between Elijah and Rabbi Yehoshua. It makes no difference whether Elijah was revealed to Rabbi Yehoshua, son of Levi, in a vision, or whether he was revealed as such, not in a vision. In other words, he's saying, did Rabbi Yehoshua actually meet Elijah, or did he have a vision of Elijah? And he's saying it doesn't make a difference. For frequently Elijah would speak words to someone, and that person did not know where they came from. It seemed to him as if those words came from himself, but they were words of Elijah speaking to him. Okay, so here too, it's unclear what actually is going on during a Gilui Eliyahu. Let's look at one more. This is from Joseph Caro, okay, great master of halacha, of Jewish law, also a Kabbalist. He describes some of his own mystical visions. He's, of course, most famous as the author of the Shulchan Aruch, the set table, the arranged table, the most significant code of Jewish law. And Caro wrote that in Tzfat. He lived in Tzfat, the same place where Isaac Luria lived and Cordovero lived. And this is Caro describing what he hears from his Magid. Yeah, Magid we think of as meaning a preacher. Magid can also mean a heavenly mentor. Yosef Caro had his own Magid, someone who communicated with him. And here he's describing one thing that the Magid told him. The Magid promises Joseph Caro, I will make you worthy of seeing Elijah, clothed in white, sitting in front of you, speaking with you as a person speaks with his friend, and your eyes will behold your teacher. Okay, you'll see Elijah. Even though your wife and other men and women will be in your house, he will speak with you and you will see him, whereas they will not see him. And his voice will appear to them as if it were your voice. Okay, what's going on here? The Magid is actually speaking, Elijah is speaking through Yosef Caro, and people in the room, they don't see Elijah, and they think the voice is Caro's own voice. So this beautiful confusion, this beautiful uncertainty, is Elijah something from beyond? Is Elijah some possibility of inspiration deep within the mystic? And finally, one last teaching about Gilui Eliyahu. I realize we could talk about this for a long time, but I want to explore several things today. How can you attain Gilui Eliyahu? This is a description of how to actually encounter Eliyahu, how to attain a revelation of Elijah. This answer to that question, how can you do it, is provided by Chaim Vital, one of the great Kabbalists, the most famous student of Isaac Luria, his closest disciple. And Vital says you can stimulate Gilui Eliyahu by doing the following. I'm not quoting here, I'm summarizing. Teshuvah, okay, turning back to God, repentance, fulfilling the mitzvot, sincere intention during prayer, intense study of Torah, an ascetic lifestyle, limiting food, drink, and sensual pleasures, seclusion, immersion in a ritual bath, meditation on the divine name, emptying one's mind of worldly concerns, and love of God. Through these practices of devotion, Vital says, Elijah, gratefully remembered, will reveal himself. The greater one's devotion, the greater Elijah's revelation. It's an amazing list of preparations. You know, they sound so general at first. They just sound like normal Jewish practice, turning back to God, fulfilling the mitzvot, having kavanah, having intention during prayer, studying Torah. Then it gets more limited number of people who would be willing, be interested in doing this. An ascetic lifestyle, seclusion, immersion in a ritual bath, meditation. So meditating on the divine name, emptying your mind of worldly concerns and love of God. That is the path to Gilui Eliyahu. It's a beautiful list beginning from simple, everyday, let's say, common Jewish practices to a more demanding spiritual lifestyle. But that's from Vital, writing in the 16th century. There's a lot to explore here, but I want to move on in a moment to the seder. Let's just look at number 4, on page 8 of the PDF. This is the Zohar's contrasting Elijah and Moses. Okay, whereas Elijah accused the people of abandoning the covenant, right, at Mount Horeb, and felt no compassion for them. It's a little exaggerated, but that's how the Zohar puts it. Moses pleaded successfully with God, saving the people from divine wrath. Okay, that's my paraphrase. This is now what the Zohar says. God said to Elijah, "This is what you should have done. What you should have pleaded for the people as Moses did. What's more, you should have realized that they are my children, my beloved children who accepted my Torah at Mount Horeb." Elijah did not depart from there. Okay, this encounter with God, Elijah did not depart from there until he swore before the Blessed Holy One that he would always advocate the merits of Israel. Whenever someone performs a meritorious act, he is the first to say before the Blessed Holy One, "So and so did such and such." He does not budge until that person's merit is recorded. Okay, this is part of Elijah's transformation. He changes from being the harsh accuser of Israel to their staunch defender. And before we turn to the Seder, look at this last quote, number 5, on page 9. This is from, again, Moses Cordovero. His mystery, the nature of Elijah, his mystery is really the mystery of divinity spreading. Divine energy clothes itself in him, extending to the world. Elijah never appears in the world without the mystery of divinity revealing itself through him. The mystery of God on earth is the mystery of Elijah. The closest that divinity can possibly come to humanity is the mystery of Elijah. Okay, this is a very extreme statement, talking about the extremist Elijah. This is actually saying Elijah conveys the divine energy. That energy clothes itself in Elijah. And this, you could say, is a kind of almost a divinization of Elijah. Elijah channels the spirit, channels the divine spirit to those who prepare themselves for it. Okay, before we turn to the Seder, let's pause for a minute or two and take a question. Mark will
Sure.
give us one or two, please.
Very interesting. So there are some questions and some observations. Have any Jewish writers warned that Jews were dangerously close to deifying Elijah? Asked Halbert.
Yeah, it's interesting that question certainly pertains to the passage we just looked at, especially. Yeah, it's interesting. I think I want to ask that everyone mute. I don't know, Mark, it's you or someone else. If you could just mute. There's something in the background there.
Muting all. Muting all. Go ahead.
There's a connection. Yes, there's a connection between Elijah and Jesus that we spoke about, right? Jesus may have thought of himself as Elijah, and then in later Christian tradition, but already in the New Testament, Elijah is identified with John the Baptist. So you could say with that in the background, Elijah, I want to be careful how I phrase this, but there's almost a competition, a potential competition between Elijah and Jesus, right? In other words, you could say that Elijah is the closest Judaism comes to divinizing someone. Okay, this could happen with Moses. It could happen with various biblical characters in the Zohar who turn into mythical figures, right? So Moses, for example, is married to the Shekhinah. That statement, even has some basis in the Talmud. But in terms of Jesus and Elijah embodies the Spirit, so he comes close to being divinized. And because of that, I would say some writers take that approach, and some writers want to stick much more to the plain shot earthly level. You were asking, are there writers who criticize that? Take, for example, Maimonides. Maimonides, of course, does not criticize Elijah, but Maimonides does not make a lot about Elijah. Maimonides does not describe in any great detail what Elijah will do to bring the Messiah. He acknowledges that Elijah will have a messianic role, but he doesn't make a big deal about it. I think because of not because of the divinization exactly, but because of you could say the cult of personality, right? There's a danger of idolizing a biblical hero or a traditional hero. So there were people who were critical about that. And remember, the rabbis are very critical of the biblical Elijah. So you do have a critique of Elijah, and that really sets the stage for the tikkun. Elijah has to learn to be more gentle. Someone mentioned last week, 2 weeks ago, we talked about that beautiful phrase in kol dimama daka, the sound of sheer stillness, right? That's how God is revealed. That's how God reveals himself at Mount Horeb to Elijah. And one of the possible meanings of that is God is saying to Elijah, quiet down, become more gentle. Don't be that raging, fanatical zealot. Mark, if you had a question of your own or else one more question from chat, then we'll go on to the Seder.
Mute. Just a sort of question. I note that there's a concept of Gilui Sheena and also Gilui Eliyahu. So I don't know if there's Gilui anything else in the tradition. That's more of an observation. But Diane King also asks about relationship between Eliyahu and Sheena.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. You have Gilui Sheena, right, and you also have Galut HaShechina, right, the exile of Shechina. Elijah and Sheena is interesting. In the Zohar, they actually become very close partners. I'm going to ask Mark to mute, please. There's something in the background there. Elijah has a close relationship with Shekhinah. You can hear me, right? Elijah has a close relationship with Shekhinah. And in fact, in one passage in the Tikkunei HaZohar, Shekhinah kisses Elijah. So you could say they are partners because Shekhinah is identified with Ruach HaKodesh. Right? Shekhinah is actually called Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. And Elijah is the master of Ruach HaKodesh, is the embodiment of Ruach HaKodesh. So there's a close connection. Okay, let's go on to the Seder because I know some people probably signed up for this series mainly because of the Seder. And of course, that's how people know Elijah. Most Jews are not avid readers of the Book of Kings. Most Jews don't know much about Elijah's biblical career. Most Jews or Christians don't know much about Elijah in the Talmud and the Midrash. The reason people know about Elijah is because of the Seder, and you might say almost that annual disappointment. As someone said to me this morning, we invited Elijah last year and he didn't show up. So that, is a frequent Jewish complaint or a Jewish joke. And I want to explore a little bit this phenomenon, this part of Elijah's career. So let's look at this text again. Elijah at the Seder, we're on page 9 of the PDF. Let's just begin with the description in Exodus of the Exodus. Number 1, Elijah at the Seder, a night of watch. The Hebrew is Leil Shimurim. Okay, shamar, to guard, to watch. So this it says in the Torah, in the book of Exodus, describing the first Passover when the Israelites are about to leave Egypt. It is Leil Shimurim, a night of watch for Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. This night is Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh's Shimurim, a watch for all the Israelites through their generations. It's not clear exactly who is watching. Is this a vigil for God, or is it God keeping vigil, protecting Israel? There's a watch or a vigil going on, and this is the basis of the Seder, right? The Seder becomes a night of watch. Now we're watching for deliverance. Just as the Israelites were delivered from Egypt, now we're looking forward to the final redemption. As a Midrash puts it, on that night they were redeemed, and on that night they are destined to be redeemed. So Passover is the time when the final redemption, when the messianic redemption will come. And since Elijah announces the Messiah, it's completely fitting that Elijah would have some role at the seder, because this is a meal that's eaten in expectation of deliverance. Later, Midrash puts it like this: on that very night, the Messiah and Elijah will appear. Okay, notice they appear together. That they are the dynamic duo. Elijah is going to pave the way for the Mashiach, announce the Mashiach. On that very night, the Messiah and Elijah will appear. The Blessed Holy One said, on the day when I wrought salvation for you, words on Passover, know that on that very night I will redeem you. Okay, so Passover is a time of redemption. It makes sense that Elijah would be here, but that's only, in a very general way. Why do we have the cup? Why do we open the door? The answer is, I don't know. The answer, it's hard to find the actual origin of these specific customs, but here's what we can figure out. Opening the door. Okay, we know that we open the door, even aside from Elijah. Sometimes it's customary to open the door. Why? Because at the beginning of the Haggadah, we say this: near the beginning of the Haggadah, let all who are hungry come and eat. Right? Called dichfin yete v'yechul in Aramaic. Let all who are hungry come and eat. Let all who are needy come and celebrate Passover. So some people would actually open their doors to invite in those who are hungry. That's one explanation of opening the door. Nothing to do with Elijah. You could open the door just because you're supposed to invite in the poor, the hungry. But it gets more interesting in number 2. This is written by someone in the 11th century, okay, a great scholar named Nissim Gaon. And here's what he says, bottom of page 10 of the PDF. I saw that my father would not close the doors of our house at all. Words, all night they would keep the doors open on Passover Eve, and until now this is our custom. Why? Because it's considered a night of watch. God is keeping watch. You're safe on the night of Passover. According to some tradition, you don't even need to say the Shema when you go to sleep because you're protected, because this is the seder and God is watching over as he watched over in Egypt. So there was a custom to actually leave the doors unlocked or open. And until now, this is our custom, Nissim Gaon goes on. And on the night of Passover, the doors of the house are open. When Elijah comes, we will go out to greet him quickly, without any delay. Okay, notice what's happening. This is the 11th century. There's not yet a custom really to have a cup for Elijah. Even this opening the door, you're not really opening the door so Elijah can come in. You're opening the door so you can go out. Since this is the night of redemption, the Mashiach hopefully will come. If the Mashiach is coming, Elijah is coming. So if he's coming, we want to be able to go out quickly and meet him. Okay, this is the first mention of opening the door for Elijah, but it's not so Elijah can come in, it's so we can go out. Okay, what about the cup? Let's jump ahead from the 11th century to the 15th century. Okay, the 15th century, it's not yet a widespread custom to have a cup for Elijah. This is a fellow named Zelikman Binga, 15th century, fairly unknown writer. I have seen some people on the night of Passover who pour a special cup and place it on the table, saying that this is the cup for Elijah the prophet, and I don't know the reason. Okay, this is a rabbinic figure, a learned Jew, writing the 15th century. He sees some people do this, he doesn't know why. But it seems that the reason derives from this. If Elijah the prophet comes on the night of Passover, as we hope and expect, he too will need a cup. For even a poor person among Israel must drink no less than 4 cups. And if the cup isn't ready, we'd have to prepare it for him, which might delay the seder. This is fascinating. Why do you pour a cup? Because you want Elijah to come, and everybody has to drink 4 cups of wine at the seder. We want to have a cup ready for Eliyahu. Okay, let's jump just a little bit to the 17th century. This next quote, still part of number 3. This is from a Sephardic rabbi, Chaim Ben Venisti, and he's talking about a custom he's seen. Okay, it seems this is the custom I saw among a few Ashkenazim. Okay, this is an Ashkenazic custom to pour a cup for Elijah. The Sephardim haven't heard about it. This rabbi says, I've seen Ashkenazim do this, to leave on the table 1 empty cup in which to pour all the wine left over in the cups of all those reclining there, after they have drunk at least the required minimum from their cups. Okay, everyone has to drink 4 cups. You don't have to drink the entire cup. You have to drink a certain amount. Whatever is left over, this was an Ashkenazi custom to pour it all into one big cup. This cup is called the cup of Elijah. The prophet gratefully remembered. This custom pleased me, and I follow it. From the remains of those cups poured into this cup, I drink during the meal. This actually upsets some later figures. How can you drink from Elijah's cup? But notice that's the state of things in the 17th century. Still, it's not universally followed. It's an Ashkenazi custom. And now the last one we'll look at about this matter of the cup. This is from Eliyahu the Gaon of Vilna. Okay, one of the greatest rabbinic scholars who ever lived in the 19th century, a great opponent of Hasidism, but himself a Kabbalist. This is a Jewish mystic who studied Kabbalah and wrote commentaries on the Zohar, but was very bitterly opposed to Hasidism. And this is what Elijah, notice his name is Elijah the Gaon of Vilna. So he had a deep connection with Eliyahu. Eliyahu the Gaon of Vilna felt a deep bond with Eliyahu the prophet in various ways. And this is what he says. We have the custom of pouring a 5th cup and calling it the cup of Elijah the prophet. Okay, we said there are 4 cups that you drink at the seder, but there was actually a dispute. Should there be 4 cups or 5 cups? So this is what the Gaon of Vilna says. We pour a 5th cup. We call it the cup of Elijah the prophet. The reason is, okay, he's offering a reason. We didn't know about the reason before. No one really knows the original reason. This is the Gaon of Vilna's reason. The reason is that there is a dispute in the Gemara over whether one needs a 5th cup. Are there 4 or are there 5 required cups? It's a dispute in the Talmud. It's not determined. The halacha is not determined. This is left open in the Talmud. Who is going to answer all of the unsolved questions? When Elijah comes, the doubt will be clarified. Okay, Elijah will tell us whether it should be 4 cups, whether it should be 5 cups. Therefore, based on this doubt, the cup is poured but not drunk, and it's called the cup of Eliyahu. For when he comes, all doubts will be clarified, including this doubt. Let's pause here. I'll take one or two questions about the seder, since I know this was such a big part of Elijah's personality.
Yes, of course.
Please.
So there are, you mentioned that Elijah can't travel on Shabbat. So what if the Seder's on Shabbos, right? Would he not be able to come to the Seder? Why open the door for him? Says Karen Levy in a pilpolistic. It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I wasn't sure we would have time for talking about Havdalah, but since you asked that question, I have to try to answer this. So, it's interesting in terms of Seder, but it's also interesting in terms of Havdalah. Let's just jump to Havdalah for a moment. We know that Eliyahu shows up at the Seder. He's invited to the Seder. We know he shows up at every Brit Milah, every circumcision. Every traditional circumcision, there's a chair for Eliyahu. We mentioned briefly last week. But he also appears, he's also expected, or he's also invoked. His name is invoked at Havdalah. I'm sure many of you have chanted many times the song for Eliyahu Hanavi. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi. That is Havdalah is associated with that song. That song is how thousands and thousands of Jews celebrate the end of Shabbat, hoping that Elijah will come. So why does Elijah appear? Why is he expected at Havdalah? The same reason he's expected at the Seder. The Seder is the meal that's eaten in expectation of Mashiach, and Shabbat is a taste of Mashiach. Right? Shabbat is known as Me'en Olam Haba, a taste of the world to come. Gives you some taste of messianic bliss, of tranquility, of fulfillment, of peace and quiet. So, and on the other hand, the Messiah is described as Yom Shekulo Shabbat, a time that's entirely Sabbath, a day, an eon that's entirely Sabbath. So you might say the Messiah is full-time Shabbat. And so on Shabbat, we get a taste of Mashiach, we yearn for Mashiach, so it makes sense to invoke Elijah or to hope that he'll come. So that's why Eliyahu is associated with Havdalah. But to answer the question of traveling, we know that Eliyahu will not come on Friday. We talked about that he won't come on Friday because people are too busy getting ready for Shabbat. But we don't know whether he'll come on Shabbat. Maybe Eliyahu could come on Shabbat. The problem is you can't travel on Shabbat. Right now, how far can you travel on Shabbat? According to Halacha, you can travel for 2,000 cubits outside the town limits, right? That's about half a mile. Now, to get from heaven, where Eliyahu is, to Yerushalayim or to earth is a lot more than half a mile. So maybe it seems that Eliyahu can't come on Shabbat. But the Talmud wonders, are you allowed to travel on Shabbat further than that if you're above the ground? They're not actually talking about Eliyahu. They're talking about, let's say, if a ship is sailing on a river and the bottom of the ship, the hull of the ship is more than a certain distance, right? The technical distance is 10 handbreadths, about 2.5 feet. If you're 2.5 feet above the surface of the ground or the bed of the river, then you can travel, perhaps. So then you can travel. The question is, what about moving in the air? Could you move in the air above that level? The question is left unanswered. So we don't know if Elijah could fly or couldn't. We assume he won't fly. So that's why Saturday night we say, okay, Shabbat is over. No more excuses. Eliyahu, we want you to come. That seems to be what's behind invoking Eliyahu's name on Motzei Shabbat. One more question about the Seder, and then
okay,
we'll move on.
So Kathy Schechter says it's interesting that none of the commentators on the cup of Elijah mention the verse Hashiv Lev Avos El Banim from Malachi. Was that, she says, was that a later addition to the Haggadah? I actually don't see that in the traditional Haggadah, that verse at all. It's
Someone,
Shabbat Haggadah.
Yeah, someone mentioned this the first week. That verse is very important for Eliyahu, but it is not in the traditional text of the Haggadah. People may chant that or sing that, but it's not formally part. In fact, Eliyahu is not mentioned in the Haggadah. Nowhere in the Haggadah, in the early traditional text of the Haggadah, it doesn't say anything about Eliyahu. It just become customary as this folk custom evolved. As we said, we don't know the exact origin. We don't know the original reason, and it's not known widely at all until late in the Middle Ages or early modern times. So that verse from Malachi, it's so important. Why? Because that's the beginning of the association between Eliyahu and the Mashiach.
Thank you very much. Just wanted you to know that there's a slight groundswell of interest in Eliyahu and Bris Milah. So if at some point you want to talk about Brit Milah, that would be
sure.
Great.
No. That's very significant. Very briefly, we can touch on it. Actually, I think we looked at the text, but I'm just going to summarize it now. Midrash in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, a late Midrash, where God is speaking to Eliyahu, and he says, Eliyahu, you're always so zealous. You were zealous when you were Pinchas. Remember that identity between the two biblical zealots, Pinchas, who's the zealot, and Eliyahu. They are said to be one and the same person. We talked about this last week a little bit. So Eliyahu is the zealot, and God says, you're always so zealous. You were zealous then, and you're zealous now. In the book of Kings, God says, you have to show up at every Brit Milah. You have to show up at every circumcision, and you'll see that the children of Israel have not abandoned the covenant. So it seems to be God's critique of Elijah. Elijah is such a zealot, and he accuses the children of Israel. God says, I'm going to prove to you that the Israelites, that the Jewish people are loyal to the covenant, and that's why Eliyahu has to show up at every Brit Milah. So a lot more about that, and in the book you can find more on it. Let's do, if there's one more question about the Seder, I'm happy to take it because that's such an intriguing thing. If you see one in the chat, please, otherwise we'll go on to something else. Mark, anything else, or that's it?
People are concerned about why the door is not open at the beginning of the Seder for Eliyahu, but rather at that particular juncture. I suppose it's connected with Shach HaMatcha, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, that changes. As I mentioned, some people did open the door at the beginning, not for Eliyahu, but in order that those who were hungry could come in and eat. But later and sometimes the cup for Eliyahu is poured at the beginning, sometimes it's poured much later. At the place in the seder where the door is traditionally open for Elijah, as Mark mentioned, it comes right as you're about to chant the paragraph, Shafoch Chamatcha, pour out your wrath upon the nations. Okay, there are a few verses from the biblical prophets about how God should avenge the attacks on the Israelites, how he should attack the enemies of the Jewish people. So those verses about God avenging Israel's suffering, it's right there that the door is open for Eliyahu. Why? You could say because of Eliyahu's own harsh quality, right? Eliyahu is the one who slaughtered the enemy, who who attacked the enemies of Israel, and God's own wrath is placed right next to the place, right at the point where we open the door for Eliyahu. So at that point, the door was opened, even it wasn't necessarily always connected with Eliyahu. And in the book, you'll see more about that. There are many, many different practices. And as we said, because the reason was not clear, people coming up with different explanations for that. Okay, let's turn to really the reason I call this book Becoming Elijah. There are two reasons, and we're going to look at some texts on page 11 of the PDF. But before we do the share screen, I'll just say that this is a Hasidic interpretation of what it means to encounter Eliyahu. We've talked about Eliyahu's tikkun, okay, Eliyahu's transformation, or his discovering of a deeper layer. You might say Eliyahu learns how to be compassionate. Eliyahu learns how to love. So it's his transformation that's taking place, but he also transforms those people whom he encounters. And that's what we're going to look at now, one or two texts from the Hasidic tradition about that. Okay, the term that we're looking at now is Bechinat Eliyahu. The Hebrew word Bechina means aspect or quality, the quality of Eliyahu. To put it simply, we have it here. Since you have the English, I'm going to read the Hebrew. Bechinat Eliyahu, yesh bechina zo b'chol adam. Okay, you can find this aspect, this bechina, in everyone. B'chol adam yesh bechina zo, aval hu b'hastara. It's hidden. Everyone has a quality of Elijah, but it's hidden. So Elijah here isn't just some mythical figure, some legendary figure, some biblical hero. Elijah is something hiding within us that we can actually uncover, discover. And we're going to look at now a lengthier passage. Just going to work on the English now. This is the bottom of page 11 of the PDF. This is from, both of these teachings are from, you can see here down in the note 28, which applies to 29 as well. Menachem Nachum of Chernobyl. Okay, this is known as the Chernobler Rebbe. He was a disciple of the Maggid of Mezrich and probably of the Baal Shem Tov as well, the founder of the Chernobyl dynasty. We know of Chernobyl now because of more unfortunate events. You might say at this time, a different kind of radiance was emanating from Chernobyl with these Hasidic masters. And this is what Menachem Nachum of Chernobyl says, going back to the verse in Mount Malachi. Okay, that verse is so important. We talked about it a minute ago. It's quoted again and again in the Zohar and Hasidic teaching. Look, I am sending to you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the day of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Truly, before the coming of the Messiah, speedily in our days, Elijah will bring the good news. Okay, what does that mean? He'll bring the good news. He'll announce the coming of the Mashiach. You might think of this as a Christian phrase, but it's a perfectly good Jewish phrase too. The Bisorah, the good news, is the news of redemption. Elijah will bring the good news. It's interesting. How does Elijah's career begin in the Bible? He's really the one who brings the bad news, right? He announces the drought. He prophesies that a drought is going to come. Then he tells Ahab that he will die, that his dynasty will end. He prophesies various negative things, but he becomes the one who brings the good news. This is part of his transformation too, from bringing the bad news to bringing the good news. So that's Elijah's role, to bring the good news, and thereby awareness will be expanded. Okay, that's the preparation for Mashiach. Mashiach here in Hasidism is not simply or not merely or not primarily someone coming to save us. Rather, it's becoming aware of the light, of the divine nature, becoming aware of our own potential, of our own link with the divine. So Elijah will bring the good news, and Elijah will stimulate awareness, as it is written, the earth will be filled with knowledge of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, as waters cover the sea. Right from Isaiah. Beautiful verse, okay? It's really, really worth looking up this verse. The earth will be filled with knowledge of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Already in the Bible, awareness or knowledge is part of the messianic prediction. Similarly, this aspect exists in every one of Israel and at all times. Okay, the quality of Elijah is there. If some good news comes to a person, let's say this is very down to earth now. He's not talking about a mystical vision. He's saying, let's say you get a good piece of news, and then he breaks off from that to something different, also doing learning. Okay, and for a while we're going to be talking about learning and not getting good news. This is just because of Hasidic style. This is really something that was given orally and then written down. So the author, the Hasidic master, is jumping from good news in general to learning. Okay, so let's talk about learning. Also during learning, when one is having difficulty with a certain matter, before da'at, knowing, reaches him, okay, you're studying something, you can't figure it out. Before you can figure it out, a kind of good news enters, for he feels a single point entering his mind. You get, let's say you get a flash of insight. Something is unclear, but you get a flash of insight. This is called Bechinat Eliyahu, the aspect of Elijah, after which the earth will be filled with knowledge. Okay, then you'll have greater awareness. Then you'll understand more fully. But first you get a little flash of insight. Then the awareness expands and is suffused with vitality. Then one can easily unite the various parts of oneself, bringing even one's lower parts toward the good. Okay, that might inspire you to work on your own tikkun. You can mend parts of yourself. You can become more whole, more integrated through this flash of insight. It was an insight about something you were studying, but it opens up something within you. It expands the awareness. For truly a spark of Elijah is enveloped within anyone bearing good news. Okay, now he comes back to good news in general. A spark of Elijah. We talked about Bechinat Eliyahu. This is Nitzotz. Nitzotz Eliyahu, a spark of Elijah. They're the same. Nitzotz Eliyahu, Bechinat Eliyahu. Truly a spark of Elijah is enveloped within anyone bearing good news, since Elijah is the bearer of all good news in the world, all good tidings. And now he clothes himself in that messenger. What does that mean? He's talking about somebody who brings you a piece of good news. That person is a messenger. If somebody walks into the room and tells you something wonderful, that person is bearing good news, and Elijah is actually clothing himself in that person to convey the good news, because any good news is linked with Elijah. That's what he's saying. If you hear a piece of good news, that is actually something of Elijah's nature being conveyed to you. For the aspect of Elijah has existed since the 6 days of creation. Okay, this is something that precedes the book of Kings. This is before the historical Elijah. This is some angelic energy that is embodied in Elijah, but now becomes more widely available. Therefore, whenever there is good news to be delivered, everyone runs out to tell it, because his soul feels the aspect of Elijah and he wants to draw it into himself. Okay, what's going on here? You hear a piece of good news, you're eager to tell someone. That's actually an aspect of Elijah within you. If you're yearning to convey good news, that means the Bechinat Eliyahu is working within you. If you had awareness, you could begin to serve God with that aspect of Elijah infusing you then. thereby ascending from rung to rung. This is then called the coming of the great day of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. This is Mashiach. You see here, it's kind of a spiritualization of Mashiach. That's what happens occasionally in Hasidism. It doesn't mean they don't believe that the Messiah will come. The Messiah will come, but this is part of the messianic awareness, the birth, the coming of the great day of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. That is linked here with awareness and expanding awareness. Thereby, for he has thereby drawn God into himself. This is the meaning of, look, I'm sending to you Elijah the prophet. For the word sending is in the present tense, because it is constantly so in each person and at all times. Okay, he closes with a beautiful midrash. Okay, this is the verse from Malachi, from Malachi. Look, I am sending to you Elijah. Why is it in the present tense? It should be, look, I will send you Elijah. No, it's in the present tense because it happens, it can happen at any moment. Let's explore this a little bit. A question or two specifically on Bechinat Eliyahu, and then really anything that we've talked about these few weeks together.
Okay, so someone, Ellen Ruth Topol says, can we think of Elijah more as an energy rather than as a person? A way of describing deep knowing, still small voice that knows the truth of inner wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, I think the best is not to limit him to any one form, right? There, to see the whole stream, to see the whole development. Certainly, I would say Elijah does become an energy, but I don't want to lose sight of the earlier phases of his career. So I think what's most important is to see how he grows, how he evolves from that biblical zealot to a kind of super rabbi in the Talmud and the Midrash, to the source of inspiration to the Kabbalists, to this kind of democratized universalization, finding the quality of Elijah within you, to see that whole stream unfolding, even though one part of it may appeal to you more, or may be more powerful than another.
Beautiful. Jennifer Malvin wants to know, why did you start with the Zohar and end up with Elijah? In other words, did your deep study of the Zohar influence your interest or impact your study of Elijah?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have any thought of writing a biography of Eliyahu until long after I completed the work on translating the Zohar, but it's wonderful that they come together. Eliyahu is significant in the Zohar, and Ginsburg claims that Eliyahu is the founder of all the Kabbalah, so it's a nice transition from Zohar to Eliyahu. There's some beautiful teachings about Eliyahu and by Eliyahu in the Zohar, and you can explore those in the book, and maybe I'll teach more specifically about that another time.
Okay. So there's you have a lot of gratitude, a lot of thanks to these three sessions.
Thank you. Mark, let me break in right there. It's interesting, gratitude, and you have this formula, Eliyahu Zachor Latov, which literally means Eliyahu, may he be remembered for the good. But it really means may he be gratefully remembered. May we remember all that he's done, or that he can do, or that he might do, that he is doing. So the gratitude is really, really linked very much to him. But thank you.
Wonderful. The quality of gratitude is something that's often in short supply, and it's something that we could all stand to have a little more of. I have a question, because I don't see much addressing of Bechinat Eliyahu, and it relates to something that Michael Burke asked. Michael Burke said, "Is there a lesson here about how to cool down zealots, political and religious, of today? They're tearing our world apart." And I think of that famous Ishbitzer Torah where Moshe, watching Pinchas do his zealous thing, the Ishbitzer seem to think that Pinchas got it wrong, that Eliyahu got it wrong, that he was applying himself to God's Torah but not to God's will. What can you say about zealotry and the function of Eliyahu in redressing it or addressing it?
Yeah. No, so Eliyahu is the zealot, or Eliyahu and Pinchas, right, who could be seen as the same. They are the zealot or zealots in the Bible, and the transformation we've been seeing from the zealot to the compassionate hero to the Jewish bodhisattva. That's remarkable, and I think it's very relevant for us. I talk about this just a little bit on the book, or the jacket of the book, how in our polarized time, it's helpful to see how a zealot made a tikkun. Right, so this tikkun, right, I'm calling it a tikkun, a repair, a mending. You could say the rabbis engineer that tikkun, or you could say Eliyahu himself feels there's a need for tikkun. Eliyahu realizes he's too much of an extremist, and he mellows. So it's somehow a joint venture between the rabbis, the midrash, and Eliyahu's own unfolding. And I think, nothing is more important. It's really how to transform rage into compassion. And notice that Eliyahu does not lose his fervor. Okay, he becomes, fanatically compassionate. Now he channels that extremism into more loving ways.
So not to reduce Elijah to a concept or a spiritual force, as many people have suggested, and you very diplomatically suggested that he has to be both, right? That the tradition allows the story of Elijah to bring us in that direction, but we should always remember that there's a connection with a let's call it a mythic personality, or maybe you want to be more literal and say a real person here, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's the question. Some people say already in the Bible he's legendary, right? So who was the original Elijah? What happened to him? We know so little. I think we can assume it's very likely there was some charismatic figure, right? Some prophetic figure. He may have been credited with miracle working, with working miracles in the 9th century in northern Israel, that man named Elijah. Then whatever he did during his lifetime, stories were woven, tales were told. That becomes the account that we see in the Book of Kings. So that's already, a long process of development, just the Book of Kings itself. But for Elijah, that's only the first, right? That's only the beginning of the story. Then who he becomes with Malachi, with the rabbis, with the Kabbalah, with Hasidus, with Islam, with Christianity, with Mormons. It's very important in the Mormon tradition. And it's hard to see where he doesn't pop up.
I love the idea that you floated, though, about the consistency, the consistent factor in his mythical personality of zealotry, whether it's zealotry, there's an underlying force in him that is intense, and that intensity can be channeled for good or for what we perceive as not so good. And I think that's a very, very important lesson psychologically for us as well. So it's really wonderful.
Good.
Some other questions. Let's see. Someone wants to know a little bit about your ongoing Zohar class, and someone else wants to know what your next project is.
The Zohar course, it's a wonderful group, and many of the people here today are in it or have been in it. I began it a little over 3 years ago, about a year before COVID. And the way it's working now, we're taking a long summer break. We're going to start again a week or two after Sukkot. October 25th, I think, is the first day. This is a class that meets for 6 weeks in a row, and then we take a break for a few weeks or sometimes longer. We meet for a series of 6 shiurim, and we're basically reading through the Zohar Pritzker edition. Now, after 3 years, we are in the middle of volume 2. We just do a few pages at a time. It's a wonderful group. You don't have to know any Hebrew or Aramaic to participate in it. There are rabbis in it. There are people who know no Hebrew at all, and I try to confuse everyone. But I basically teach for about an hour, and then we have time for questions. My wife, Hannah, offers spiritual meditation and her own reflections, which are wonderful. And that's an English course. There also is a course in Aramaic. I teach it in English, but we look at the original Aramaic text of the Zohar. The prerequisite for that is that you have a reading knowledge of Hebrew. So you can find out more about all those if you just Google Zohar course and my name, or Zohar Stanford. The address is too long, but we can put it in the chat. It's not easy. It's not hard to find. just Google my name and Zohar course, and you'll find the description on the website of Stanford University Press. And people are welcome to look at that and then email me about it.
What a wonderful opportunity, if one can, to study Zohar with any man. And the link is now going to be put for everybody in the chat.
Yeah, and thank you. And I think Ari is also sending it out to everyone. So
okay.
if you get it now, great.
Super.
I think Hilda has a question. Why don't we let her ask one?
Yes.
We're now. Please
go ahead, Hilda. You can unmute.
I don't have a question. I hit the wrong button.
Okay.
Okay. There's a wrong button hit.
Okay. If there's one more question from chat, please feel free to take it, and then we can.
Okay. I'm just reviewing them. They're very small. A lot of questions about Elijah as an energy or as a force versus a person. I think you've covered that quite well. This is an interesting one from Martin. I saw it before, Martin Bobrovsky. Why is Elijah the only prophet who's designated by his geographical particulars when we sing about him? We don't sing about Yirmiyahu Anatoti. Yeah, Jeremiah was famously Mina Kohanim from the priestly families of Anatot, but we don't sing about him that way. Yeah. What is it about the Tishbitism of Eliyahu that's interesting or important?
Yeah, that's interesting. He's unique in so many ways. I think it's that, people have such a hard time pinning him down, so they just grasp at anything they can. When he's called Eliyahu Hanavi, but in that song, Eliyahu Tishbi, from the town of Tishbe. People aren't exactly sure exactly where that is, although it's pretty clear. It's near the Jordan, and there is a village there with a very similar name. And then Eliyahu Giladi, the Gileadites, right? Gilad is a term that's used for the Transjordan, for the eastern shore of the Jordan. So Eliyahu is somewhere from that territory, and because the Bible uses those words about him, those have entered the song and his title. There's so many unique things about him. One other thing I wanted to say about his transformation, we talked about different ways in which he changes. One way he changes is from a loner to an intimate part of the Jewish family. Right, in the Bible, he's really on his own. He goes off to the desert. He runs away. He's, fleeing from Ahab, Jezebel. He's never in one place for too long. So he's hard to find. He's hard to pin down. He's the Ruach. But then he becomes such a frequent visitor in the Jewish household, right? So he's there every seder, supposedly, hopefully. And he's there. His name is invoked on Havdalah, all the ways we've talked about. So he changes from a loner to a part of the family. I want to read one very short thing about the Seder, since this comes up so frequently. The question, why didn't he show up? That annual disappointment. I want to read you two very short things about that. This is from the book, reading page 133 of the book, Becoming Elijah. Memories of Elijah and the Seder can be bittersweet, recalling the annual disappointment of not finding him at the door. Once before Passover, according to a Hasidic tale, the disciples of Menachem Mendel, the Kotzker Rebbe, complained to him about this. Right? Why do we open the door and he never shows up? The Rebbe promised them that Elijah would be revealed to them at the upcoming Seder. On the first night of the festival, the room was full, the atmosphere charged, with Elijah's cup waiting on the table. The Seder proceeded. Finally, the door was opened. What happened next left the disciples astonished. Nothing. No one appeared. Crushed, they turned to the Rebbe, whose face was beaming. Seeing their distress, he asked, "What's troubling you?" They told him. "Fools," he thundered, "do you think that Elijah the prophet enters through the door? He enters through the heart." So that's beautiful, and it really links up with what we talked about, Bechinat Eliyahu, the quality of Elijah, feeling that inspiration feeling that spirit within you. And let's close with something near the very end. You can see now why the book is called Becoming Elijah. It's how Elijah becomes Elijah, his transformation, but it's also about a personal transformation we can experience to encounter or discover that Elijah quality. Let me read this, another Hasidic tale. It's page 155 of the book. According to a Hasidic tale, a pious Jew once asked his rabbi why Elijah never appeared on the night of the seder. Even though the door was open for him and his goblet of wine was waiting on the table, the rabbi told him, there's a very poor family in your neighborhood. Go visit them and propose that next year you and your family will celebrate Passover with them in their house, and that you'll provide everything they need for the whole holiday. Then on the night of the seder, Eliyahu will certainly come. The man did as he was told, but after the following Passover, he returned to the rabbi, complaining that once again Elijah had failed to appear. The rabbi responded, Elijah came, but you couldn't see him. Holding a mirror to the man's face, he continued, look, this was Elijah's face. Night. So that possibility of encountering Elijah or even becoming Elijah, that's the most mysterious thing about him.
We are truly blessed to have had you teaching us, Danny. This has been a wonderful opportunity. I wish I could do it every day. I wish I had time to join the Zohar class. I've been at many Zohar classes in my life, but I'm sure this would be the very best one. I would recommend it to anybody. I've heard wonderful things, and I very, very much appreciate everybody's attendance and look forward to seeing you very soon in our next CSB program. Thank you, Danny, Matt, once again, and I send my warmest regards to all of you. Wonderful rest of the summer, and if I don't see you before then, I wish you many years and a happy New Year. Okay, thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Bye-bye.
All the best. Shalom. Great
Shalom,
to be with you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.